Hello again. I'm sorry for my absence, which was YouTube's doing rather than mine. Thank you to all those who contacted me to express their concerns at my disappearance. This was much appreciated. I want to look this evening at the idea of multiculturalism, which is the ruling ideology in Britain, at least as far as ethnicity, race, religion, and immigration are concerned. The idea is that all cultures are equal, or of equal value, and we should not expect newcomers to abide by the values of the majority, because this would be oppressive. Instead, we should acknowledge that there is no reason why our values and customs should be any better than those of immigrant communities, and that rather than their making an effort to conform to our way of doing things, we should all accept that society is a cultural mosaic and adopt a pluralistic mindset to language, religion, and everything else. There is a problem with this approach, and that is that it almost invariably ends in massacres and bitter civil wars. Indeed, the worst barbarism of the years since the end of the Second World War have usually been caused by multiculturalism. Let's look at one or two examples to see what I mean by this. The former nation of Yugoslavia was, during the 1960s and 70s, regarded as a perfect case study of multiculturalism. All kinds of different cultures lived amicably side by side. Croatians in one province wrote using the Latin alphabet, while Serbs used the Cyrillic script, in which Russian is written. In the province of Bosnia-Herzegovina, over half the people were Muslim, while in Kosovo 95% of the population were Muslim. In Croatia, by contrast, 85% of the people were Catholic, whereas in Serbia they belonged to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And yet all these different cultures with their varying languages, religions and ethnicities rubbed along marvellously, an example to us all. I need hardly go into the dreadful events in the Balkans in the 1990s, which saw some of the worst atrocities that the world has seen since 1945. This was the true face of multiculturalism, the slaughter of 8,000 civilians at Srebrenica in 1995. Or consider another multicultural paradise, as it then was, Lebanon. When first I was in Beirut, it was known as the Paris of the Middle East, a wonderful city where everybody got along famously. Although a third of the population was Christian, another third Shia, and the rest Sunni Muslim, with a large number of Druze as well, they showed how Christians and Muslims could live cheerfully side by side, respecting each other's cultures. Until the Civil War, that is, in the late 1970s. I had a walk-on part in that war, and I can tell viewers it was the most savage affair imaginable. Lebanon is about to fall into the abyss again, and the driving force is the multicultural nature of the society. Cyprus, with its Turkish Muslims and Greek Christians, is another example of multiculturalism, as is Israel. Looking back a few years further, we remember the Nigerian Civil War, in which it was found that the Igbo and Yoruba couldn't, after all, live together so very peacefully as everybody hoped. The problem with multiculturalism and multicultural societies is that they are always on the edge of a knife, ready to fall at a moment's notice. The larger the percentage of the minorities involved, the more dangerous is the situation. Sometimes things can work out okay for years, decades even, but it always ends in tears. Multicultural societies seem to be somehow inherently unstable. They seem to contain within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. And when they do start going wrong, the violence tends to be horrific. Just think for a moment of those massacres of the Bosnian Muslims by their Serb neighbours. Sometimes, if you have a strong dictatorship or a powerful colonial authority, you can prevent multicultural societies from imploding. This is what happened with Marshal Tito in Yugoslavia. As long as he kept an iron grip on the country, everything went reasonably well. Once democracy arrived, it all fell apart. And that's because democracy and multiculturalism don't really work together well. The opposite of multiculturalism is not, of course, rule by white supremacists, which is the impression you sometimes get when you hear people responding to criticism of multiculturalism. The opposite ideology is the eminently sensible one of assimilation. This is how things used to be in Britain and how they were meant to be at one time, when immigration first began from the new Commonwealth in the years following the end of the Second World War. Put simply, those arriving would try and fit in with the customs they found in the country to which they had come. After a generation or so, they would fit in fine and be absorbed as ordinary citizens. This is what the Americans used to call the idea of the melting pot. Left-wing types with no knowledge of history then came up with the idea that this approach showed racial prejudice. Why should our customs be any better than those of the immigrants? Why should they adopt our ways and try to fit in? Rather, we should try to adapt to their ways. In short, these people set out to build a multicultural society of the kind which existed in Yugoslavia and Lebanon. I do not doubt for a moment that their intentions were good, but alas, we all know about the road to hell. As the proportions of different minority cultures grow, so a society is likely to become less stable. This is just how multicultural societies are. There's nothing to be done about it. It's the nature of the beast. If the policy were altered in a country and newcomers were encouraged to assimilate rather than maintain their own separate traditions, then even now it might be possible to head off a crisis in some countries in Europe, such as Britain, which have adopted this policy. But I can't see that happening. It would need a major change in the ideological perspective of too many people, and time is running a little short. I don't say any of this with any satisfaction, but merely as the likely outcome of the course upon which certain nations are currently set. Stability and peace are more likely in monocultural societies, those which have one common language, religion and set of cultural values which everybody shares and to which everybody adheres. Sweden used to be like that, although there have been changes there and the results may already have been observed. Ireland has a monocultural society, but there are efforts to change this and turn it into a multicultural nation. I shall talk about this tomorrow. I will leave you all with one final example of a multicultural society. In 1946, India was almost the archetype of a multicultural society, with Hindus and Muslims, Buddhists and Christians all sharing the country together. A dozen languages, different alphabets, different customs. It was a multicultural dream. They lived together like this because the British colonial authorities kept things in check, a bit like Tito in Yugoslavia. When the British left in 1947, you might have thought that the Muslims and Hindus would say to themselves, oh, well, this is nice. Now that the colonialists have gone, we can all settle down and enjoy living next door to people who speak different languages and follow a different religion to our own. What really happened, of course, was that the Hindus fell upon their Muslim neighbours and murdered as many of them as they could before driving the rest of them out as refugees. The Muslims did the same to the Hindus who lived near them. Around 15 million refugees, and the Lord only knows how many died in the massacres. Official estimates are between 2 or 3 million deaths, but it was probably more than that. That's what multiculturalism leads to, and why there is such enthusiasm for it today is a complete mystery to me.